I never thought that the most important day of my daughter's life would begin with a pain so deep it could crush me. As I stepped through the grand doors of the luxury hotel where her wedding was set to take place, my eyes froze on a photo hung right at the entrance. It was my face, my forced smile, stiff posture. Below the photo, in elegant, swirling script, were words that pierced me like ice: no entry. I stood there, stunned. My heart felt like it had been hammered by an iron fist. The daughter I had poured all my love, all my sacrifices, all my dreams into had suddenly turned me into a stranger on the happiest day of her life. The sweet, proud moment I had imagined, watching her walk down the aisle in a pristine white gown, was gone, replaced by emptiness, confusion, and a gnawing sense of heartbreak I never thought possible. I turned and walked away, leaving behind every dream of a perfect family. Each step dragged me into a nightmare with no escape, where my daughter's betrayal wrapped itself around my heart like a vice. Not a word, not a glance back, just cold, deliberate distance, something I could never have imagined from someone I raised. 3 hours later, my old phone started buzzing non-stop, 73 missed calls. The number alone felt like a warning, an ominous signal that something was very wrong. The beeping, the relentless vibration, shattered the quiet of the winter evening I had hoped would be calm. The cold blue light of the screen sliced across the room like a blade. I fumbled for the phone, hands shaking, and then my daughter's face appeared, Eva, smiling radiantly, her eyes sparkling with joy. "Dad, you have to see this. I'm getting engaged." I didn't even have time to respond. On the screen behind Eva, a luxurious apartment sprawled out. Marble surfaces gleaming, floor-to-ceiling windows revealing a glittering San Francisco skyline. The emptiness I felt intensified. My daughter was stepping into a world I wasn't invited to. Eva lifted her left hand. The diamond ring sparkled, scattering tiny rainbows across her flushed cheeks. "Look, Dad, isn't it beautiful?" My mouth went dry, and then he appeared, Harold Kensington. Tall, sharp-featured, hair perfectly groomed, a dazzlingly white smile. His eyes never met mine. They glided past me with a practiced ease, a kind of confidence that made my skin crawl, a subtle, chilling energy beneath the charm. "Dad, he's been so successful with cryptocurrency." "He has big plans," Eva said, her voice trembling with excitement. Harold nodded, a short, composed reply. "When you know, you know." But I saw something odd in the way he twisted the gold ring on his pinky, the flicker in his gaze, the perfect posture that was just slightly too controlled. I tried to keep calm, trying to show the excitement of a proud father, but every detail, the way he looked at my daughter, the way he seemed to control every aspect of her life, felt like needles piercing my gut. Eva gushed about how Harold handled everything, from the venue to the flowers, the menu, every little detail. Everything was controlled by him, using my money, and I, her father, was left out, unsure of my role in the picture. 3 nights later, I couldn't sleep. Every gesture, every glance, every controlled move Harold made haunted me. Harold Kensington, the perfect man. But why did my heart scream warning after warning? Every lesson my late wife, Margaret, had taught me about spotting deceit played in my mind like an unrelenting echo. Margaret always said, "Truth is more important than comfort. Don't let charm fool you." But Margaret had been gone too long, leaving me alone to face the hardest choice of my life: trust my daughter or trust my instincts. The love of a father for his child, something I believed was unbreakable, now became a weapon against me, forcing me to imagine the worst. I picked up the phone again, calling my daughter, trying to maintain a calm voice. All I got was her cheerful, carefree chatter, oblivious to the storm I felt brewing. Everything seemed perfect, too perfect, and that too much perfection made me shiver. I looked out the window. Brooklyn lay quiet under the night sky. I knew a storm was coming, not a storm of nature, but a storm of betrayal, deceit, and the hidden schemes my daughter had yet to see. Helplessness, fear, and rising anger consumed me. That night I didn't sleep. I prepared, documenting every detail, every move, every glance, evidence if I was wrong or if I was right. And in that moment, between the cold glow of my phone and the darkness surrounding my apartment, I realized one thing for certain: this wedding will not be ordinary, and I, a betrayed father, will not stand by on the sidelines. The next morning the city didn't wake as it usually did. Fog hung low over the skyline, curling between skyscrapers like ghostly fingers. Brooklyn's streets, typically humming with life, seemed muted, almost expectant, as if the city itself knew something monumental was about to unravel. I walked down the narrow streets toward Eva's apartment, each step echoing like a drumbeat of impending confrontation. The world outside was bustling, taxis honking, construction crews hammering, yet inside, my mind was deafened by one overwhelming thought: who is Harold Kensington, really? I had spent months researching him the night I first glimpsed Eva's excitement about their engagement. Cryptocurrency mogul, venture capitalist, philanthropist, his resume was spotless, polished to the point of unnatural brilliance. But that brilliance, I realized, might be a carefully crafted mask. The perfect image can hide the ugliest intentions. And I had a father's instinct whispering, warning me, not everything that glitters is gold. The apartment building itself reflected the world Harold curated. Minimalist design, white marble floors, sunlight bouncing off clean glass surfaces. Each corner, each object seemed deliberately placed to convey perfection. There were no personal touches, no warmth, just the sterile precision of someone obsessed with control. When I stepped into the lobby, the concierge greeted me with the mechanical politeness of someone trained to treat Harold's guests like royalty. I asked for Eva, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. "She's in the kitchen," the concierge replied, not noticing the tension radiating from me, or maybe choosing not to. The kitchen was flooded with light, revealing Eva bustling over a small breakfast tray. She looked radiant, serene, entirely at ease in a world that, from my perspective, had suddenly grown alien. The diamond ring sparkled on her hand like a warning beacon. "Dad," she exclaimed, her voice warm, unaware of the questions tearing at my mind. "I made you coffee, sit down." I complied, forcing a smile as I accepted the cup, but even as I sipped, my eyes scanned the room, cataloging everything. The appliances gleamed with high-end perfection, and a wall-mounted tablet controlled everything from lighting to security. Cameras discreetly perched in corners. My stomach churned. This wasn't just a home, it was a fortress, a meticulously orchestrated environment designed for surveillance, precision, and control. "Isn't it amazing?" Eva said, her eyes shining with pride. "Harold designed everything. He even programmed the lighting schedule for maximum energy efficiency. Isn't it perfect?" Perfect. That word, once comforting, now sounded like a threat. I forced a nod, replying cautiously, "It's impressive." Eva laughed, a light, tinkling sound that somehow made my chest ache. "I'm so glad you're here, Dad. Harold wants to meet you after breakfast. He says he has something special to discuss with you." I set down my cup. Something about the phrasing felt deliberate, something special. Harold never does anything without a plan. Every smile, every gesture, every word from him carries weight. It's calculated. And right now I was being pulled directly into his orbit. After breakfast, we moved to the living room. Harold was already there, seated on a pristine leather sofa, his posture perfect, every inch of him radiating calm control. He extended his hand with the precision of a man who has rehearsed this exact moment countless times. "Mr. Lawson," he said, his voice smooth, velvet-like, yet carrying an undercurrent that made my skin crawl. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." I took his hand, firm but cautious. There was a strength there, but not in the way of honesty or warmth. It was the strength of someone used to bending situations to his will, the quiet dominance of a man who expects compliance without question. "Thank you, Harold," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "I've heard a lot about you." "Yes, and I hope all of it good," he said with a charming smile. But his eyes, sharp and calculating, didn't quite meet mine. They scanned, assessing, measuring like a predator observing prey before striking. We sat down. Harold poured coffee from a French press, an elaborate gesture meant to display control, elegance, and refinement. Eva beamed at the scene, completely oblivious to the tension under the polished surface. "So, Dad," Harold began, leaning slightly forward, "I wanted to discuss our plans. Eva and I are moving forward very quickly. I want you to be part of it, but on my terms. Transparency is flexible, don't you agree?" His words were carefully chosen, polite but loaded. A warning, a veiled threat, and a test all in one. He was establishing boundaries while asserting dominance, ensuring I understood my place in this carefully constructed world. I swallowed, my mind racing. My instinct screamed to confront him, to question, to warn Eva, but logic and caution held me back. This wasn't just a meeting. It was the first move in a game I didn't fully understand, and Harold had clearly studied every angle. Eva interrupted, laughing nervously. "Oh, Harold, you always sound so mysterious." "Dad, don't worry, he's a great guy. Really, you'll like him once you get to know him." I nodded, smiling faintly, but my mind was a storm of suspicion and dread. The apartment, the meticulous details, Harold's calculated demeanor, everything screamed of control, manipulation, and hidden agendas. Later, I explored the apartment on my own. Each room revealed more of Harold's obsession with order. A library filled with rare books, perfectly aligned. Gym with state-of-the-art equipment. Cameras discreetly hidden in hallways, subtly tracking movement. Every corner radiated precision, discipline, and power, an environment designed not for comfort but for dominance. And then I found the study, the room that truly exposed Harold's mind. Floor-to-ceiling monitors displayed news feeds, cryptocurrency prices, security feeds, even social media alerts. A wall of schematics detailed investments, offshore accounts. Even plans for future acquisitions. Every detail of his life, and indirectly Eva's, was meticulously monitored, controlled, predicted. It was then that I understood Harold Kensington was not just a man. He was a fortress of ambition, manipulation, and power. He was a world in himself, and he had drawn my daughter into it. That evening, as Eva and Harold celebrated with friends in the apartment, I stood by the window, looking out over the city. Brooklyn sparkled under the night sky, unaware of the storm brewing within these walls. I clenched my fists, feeling a mix of fear, anger, and resolve. I realized something fundamental. To protect Eva, to protect my family, I had to understand this man completely. Every gesture, every word, every decision he made could be a clue or a trap. This was not a simple engagement. This was the first act in a high-stakes game of control, deception, and survival. As I left the apartment that night, walking back through foggy streets, I made a promise to myself. I would not allow my daughter to be consumed by Harold's world without knowing the truth. I would dig, uncover, and expose the reality hidden behind the flawless facade, and if necessary, I would confront Harold Kensington, no matter the cost. Because in a world that appears perfect, the cracks always reveal the most terrifying truths, and I had just glimpsed the first ones. The city was still drenched in early morning fog when my phone buzzed. The message was short, almost chilling in its simplicity. "Meet me, midnight, Pier 17, come alone." No signature, no explanation, just those words. I stared at the screen, a cold shiver crawling down my spine. Pier 17 was an abandoned shipping dock, a place where shadows outnumbered light. Whoever sent this knew I would come. And whatever awaited me, there was not going to be simple pleasantries. By the time I arrived, the pier was enveloped in darkness. The moon cast silver streaks across the water, illuminating rusted cranes and abandoned containers. A single figure emerged from the shadows, tall and deliberate, every movement precise. "Who are you?" I demanded, keeping my voice steady, hiding the surge of adrenaline beneath a veneer of calm. The figure raised a hand, revealing a small, encrypted flash drive. "Call it insurance," the voice said, smooth, deliberate. "Everything you think you know about Harold Kensington is a lie, and your daughter, she's in danger." My heart skipped. "Explain now." The stranger stepped back, fading into the shadows. "Check this. Midnight. If you value her life, you'll do exactly as it says." And then they were gone, leaving only the faint echo of footsteps against metal. I hesitated, gripping the flash drive. The fog felt heavier now, thicker, almost suffocating. Something fundamental had just shifted. Harold was no longer simply a meticulous control freak. He was part of a larger, far darker picture, and Eva, my daughter, was at the center. Back in my apartment, I inserted the drive into my laptop. The files were encrypted, locked behind layers of code so complex that even seasoned programmers would struggle. But buried within them were images, photos of Eva taken without her knowledge, financial documents linking Harold to offshore accounts, even personal messages that hinted at a manipulative, calculated intent. Every detail screamed one truth. Harold Kensington was building something bigger than anyone could imagine, and I was now standing on the edge of a precipice. The first image made me stop cold. Eva, smiling at Harold, unaware of a small, almost invisible earpiece tucked behind her hair. The documents confirmed it. He had been monitoring her movements for weeks, learning her routines, cataloging every interaction, controlling the smallest details of her life. and then the message appeared on my laptop screen. Tonight everything changes, watch carefully. My instincts screamed at me to go to Eva immediately, but another part of me, trained by years of skepticism and caution, held me back. This was Harold's world now, and any rash move could be catastrophic. I had to understand the game before making a move. Hours passed. The city fell into silence as the night deepened. Then at precisely midnight, my phone vibrated again. A video file. I pressed play. Eva was standing on the balcony of Harold's penthouse, the city skyline behind her like a glittering cage. Harold appeared beside her, his expression calm, almost fatherly, but his eyes were cold, calculating. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling slightly, he says I have to make a choice, and I don't understand why." The camera panned slightly, revealing a small black device attached to the railing, a device that, if activated, could trigger catastrophic consequences across the city's financial systems. Bitcoin exchanges, stock markets, banking networks, all linked through a single, vulnerable network Harold controlled. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about Eva anymore. It was about thousands, potentially millions of lives. Harold Kensington was capable of turning the city and the world into his chessboard. The video cut to a message typed on the screen: "Make a move or everything ends." I sat frozen, gripping the laptop as if it could somehow shield me from the nightmare unfolding. Every scenario raced through my mind: confront Harold and risk Eva's life, wait and gather evidence and risk the catastrophic activation of his plan, or somehow play along, pretending compliance while I searched for leverage. I chose the last. The next morning I returned to the apartment, pretending normalcy, hiding the terror churning inside me. Eva greeted me with her usual warmth, unaware of the storm raging outside the walls. Harold welcomed me with that same smooth charm, masking the darkness underneath. "You look tense," Harold said, noticing perhaps just enough to test me. "Relax, Mr. Lawson, tonight is important. Eva and I have a private event I'd like you to attend." I nodded, masking my dread. I had no choice. The event was a trap, I could feel it. Yet attending was necessary to understand the full scope of Harold's intentions. That night, the private event was held in an enormous, glass-walled hall atop Harold's penthouse. The city sprawled beneath, a silent audience to what was about to unfold. Guests mingled, unaware that the real performance was not social, it was strategic. Every conversation, every toast, every polite smile was part of Harold's intricate game. I kept my eyes on Eva. She was radiant, laughing, oblivious to the danger surrounding her. Harold moved around like a maestro, orchestrating the scene, every gesture precise, every movement calculated. Then it happened. The lights flickered, a barely noticeable interruption, followed by a low hum that vibrated through the floor. Screens around the room suddenly displayed cascading numbers, cryptocurrency values plummeting, banking networks failing, financial alerts blaring. Panic began to ripple through the crowd. Harold remained calm. "Do not worry," he said, voice steady, almost soothing. "This is only a test, a simulation," but I knew better. He was testing not just the systems, but the reactions, the psychological control he had over those who surrounded him, including Eva. This was his demonstration of power, his way of showing that in his world nothing and no one was beyond his control. I needed to act, but every instinct screamed caution. One wrong move, one flash of panic, and Harold would have what he wanted: compliance through fear, domination through chaos. Eva approached me, eyes wide. "Dad, what's happening?" I leaned close, whispering. "Stay calm, watch, learn, and trust me, we're getting out of this." The simulation ended as abruptly as it began, leaving the room buzzing with nervous energy. Guests whispered, checking phones, trying to understand what had just occurred. Harold smiled, serene, triumphant. He had planted the seed of fear, testing boundaries and proving his reach. I realized in that moment that Harold Kensington was not just a manipulator. He was a visionary in his own dark way. Someone who could bend reality to his will. And the first major trigger had been set in motion. Eva's life, the city's systems, and my own moral compass were all entwined in a dangerous web I had only begun to understand. Leaving the penthouse that night, I understood one thing with brutal clarity: the rules had changed. Harold had escalated from a personal threat to a systemic one. And to protect Eva, I needed more than courage. I needed strategy, allies, and the ability to anticipate a man who seemed always 2 steps ahead. The first domino had fallen. And as I walked through the silent, fog-draped streets, I felt the gravity of the situation settle over me. The trigger had been pulled. The stakes were no longer hypothetical. The countdown had begun. The city never slept, but I had, or at least I tried. The night after the simulation, I wandered through my apartment like a ghost, unable to settle, haunted by the images of Eva on that balcony and the subtle, precise terror Harold had orchestrated. Every shadow seemed longer, every creak in the floorboards louder. The world felt thinner somehow, as if Harold's reach had stretched beyond the walls of his penthouse, beyond the city itself. He was everywhere, watching. Anticipating, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with what-ifs, each one more unbearable than the last. What if I made the wrong move? What if Eva got hurt? What if this was just the beginning and Harold's plans were far worse than anything I could imagine? I went over every possible strategy, every conversation I'd had with Harold. I replayed his calm, controlled voice. "Do not worry, this is only a test, a simulation." But the test had been real. And the hum of fear it left in its wake resonated deep within me. Days blurred into nights, and the stress began to show. My hands shook, my appetite disappeared, and I found myself walking the streets aimlessly, seeking solace in the anonymity of the crowds, yet feeling the eyes of Harold's design everywhere I went. Every face seemed like a potential threat, every glance a judgment. And then came the call. "Mr. Lawson." Harold's voice, silky, smooth, sent shivers down my spine even over the phone. "Meet me tonight at the rooftop garden. Come alone. I have something to show you, something unavoidable." I wanted to refuse to hide, to protect myself and Eva from whatever twisted spectacle awaited me. But the knowledge that Harold's games had no boundaries, that he could manipulate even the smallest variables in Eva's life, left me powerless. The rooftop garden was a cathedral of steel and glass. Overlooking the city skyline, Harold stood at the center, arms spread as if embracing the chaos he had created, and there in the middle of the garden was Eva, calm, composed, but her eyes betrayed fear. "Dad," she whispered as I approached. I don't understand," he said. "He said I had to see this." Harold's smile was predatory. "Welcome," he said. "This is the culmination of what we discussed. Reality is fragile, Mr. Lawson. People are fragile. And your daughter, well, she's the most fragile of all. Observe." He gestured, and the city lights dimmed, replaced by projections that spanned the entire skyline. Screens displayed personal data, banking accounts, travel itineraries, personal conversations, medical records, every detail of millions of lives reduced to raw, manipulable code. "This," Harold said, voice resonating across the rooftop, "is power. This is control, and if you fail to understand it, the consequences are irreversible." Eva looked at me, pleading silently. "Dad, what do we do?" I didn't have an answer. I couldn't promise her safety. I couldn't promise the cities. Harold had pulled back the veil, showing the true magnitude of his power, and in that moment I realized how small, how fragile we all really were. Over the following days, Harold escalated his psychological games. Anonymous messages arrived at my apartment, each more invasive than the last. He knew my routines, my friends, even minor decisions I thought were private. It was a suffocating presence, like a storm cloud that never dispersed. Eva grew quieter, withdrawn, the spark in her eyes dimmed. She began asking questions, innocent, probing, but the weight of Harold's shadow made every answer impossible. I tried to shield her, tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but the breakdown had already begun. And then the first real tragedy struck. A close colleague, someone I had trusted implicitly, was revealed to be an accomplice of Harold. The betrayal was devastating. Evidence showed they had fed Harold information about my movements, my strategies, even my private communications with Eva. The realization shattered any illusion of control I had clung to. Anger surged, burning and bitter, but it was impotent against the scale of Harold's manipulation. Every attempt to confront, to negotiate, to strategize was met with calm, precise countermeasures. He anticipated my every move. My sense of agency, my very identity, was eroding. I began seeing Harold's fingerprints in every aspect of my life. Credit lines altered, travel plans sabotaged, friends turning distant without explanation. Even Eva's school life was infiltrated, emails, grades, and personal correspondence, all tainted by Harold's influence. One night, unable to endure the psychological assault, I fled to the outskirts of the city, seeking refuge in anonymity. I walked for hours through empty streets, the neon glow of distant signs casting eerie shadows. It was there alone that the depth of my despair hit me. The breakdown was complete. The illusion of control, the belief that I could protect Eva, the notion that I could outmaneuver Harold, it had all crumbled. I felt naked, exposed, a shell of the man I thought I was. And yet, amidst the despair, a spark of clarity emerged. The breakdown had revealed the absolute stakes. Harold's power, terrifying as it was, had boundaries. Patterns existed in his control. Weaknesses, subtle and hidden, were there. And if I could endure the pain, the fear, the constant pressure, I might find a way to exploit them. Eva became the anchor. Despite her fear, she trusted me, and that trust became my lifeline. Every time Harold's presence seemed unbearable, I focused on her. Her safety, her hope, her resilience, they reminded me why I couldn't give in, why I couldn't allow the breakdown to consume me entirely. Weeks turned into months. Each encounter with Harold pushed me further. Each revelation chipped away at my resolve, but also sharpened it. The breakdown was both a torment and a teacher. It forced me to understand the scope of Harold's influence, to confront my own limitations, and to acknowledge the depths of fear I was capable of enduring. And then, in the midst of this torment, a message appeared on my laptop, encrypted but unmistakable. The next step is inevitable. Choose wisely or everything is lost. It was Harold, of course. The message was a reminder of his omnipresence, a symbol of the pressure that had driven me to the brink, but it also marked the moment where the breakdown reached its peak, the point where despair could transform into strategy, where anguish could forge resilience, and where the pain of helplessness could ignite the drive to fight back. I stared at the screen for hours, trembling, exhausted, but resolute. Harold had broken me, stripped me bare, revealed every vulnerability, but in doing so, he had also illuminated the path forward. Every manipulation, every act of control, every psychological assault, each carried a pattern, a rhythm, a signature. And if I could decode them, if I could anticipate the next move, I might have a chance to reclaim agency, to protect Eva, to confront Harold on my terms. The breakdown had reached its peak, the zenith of suffering and fear, but in that zenith lay the seed of resistance, and as the city slept, unaware of the invisible war raging above it, I realized the fight was far from over. The true test was just beginning. The nights were long, and the city outside seemed oblivious to the storm raging in my mind. Every streetlight, every passing car, every whisper of wind against the window became a reminder of how fragile the world had become. Not just the city, not just Eva and I, but every semblance of stability we'd ever known. Harold had stripped it all away, and yet in the depth of despair something began to stir. A subtle shift, a quiet, almost imperceptible awareness that the breakdown, as devastating as it had been, had left behind more than emptiness. It had left clarity. I spent hours reflecting, retracing every moment, every encounter, every manipulation Harold had orchestrated. I reviewed his moves, his patterns, his uncanny ability to anticipate my actions. The more I observed, the more I realized that his power was not absolute. It was calculated, predictable in its own way. And that realization, as small and fragile as it seemed, became the first flicker of hope. I started keeping meticulous notes, cataloging every message, every call, every subtle manipulation I had witnessed. The acts that had once paralyzed me now became data, evidence of patterns, threads I could follow. Each detail, each nuance, each seemingly insignificant piece of information became a key to understanding Harold's psychology. Eva noticed the change before anyone else. She had retreated into silence during the breakdown, her eyes carrying the weight of fear and uncertainty. But when I began speaking differently, less panic, more strategy, she responded. There were moments, brief but powerful, when she smiled, asked questions, offered insights. She became not just a reason to fight, but an active participant in our survival. I also began to confront my own limitations. Fear had dominated my actions for so long that I hadn't realized how much it had shaped my decisions. I had allowed Harold to dictate my responses, to manipulate my emotions, to corner me into helplessness. Recognizing this was painful, almost humiliating, but it was also liberating. The first step toward reclaiming agency is acknowledging how much control you've given away. I began small. I refused to answer every call immediately. I questioned the urgency of Harold's messages. I tested my assumptions, challenged my instincts. Each small act of defiance, each hesitation, each calculated choice became a psychological exercise, strengthening my resolve. In the quiet hours, I visualized confrontation, not in terms of physical combat, but mental chess. I imagined scenarios where Harold had made a misstep, where his arrogance led him to underestimate my resolve. I rehearsed dialogues, anticipated his taunts, prepared for the emotional manipulation I knew he would attempt. This mental preparation became a form of meditation, a tool to rebuild my shattered confidence. But the true turning point came unexpectedly. One evening, alone in the apartment, I found a journal I had kept years ago, before the world became Harold's stage. Its pages were filled with raw, unfiltered thoughts, aspirations, fears, and reflections. Flipping through them, I saw a man who had once believed in his own judgment, who had once trusted his instincts, who had not yet been broken by fear. Reading those words, I realized that Harold's attacks were not only against me, they were against the very essence of who I was. The breakdown had stripped away the layers of my identity, but the core, the principles, the resilience, the capacity for reason remained. Reconnecting with that core became the pivot of the inner shift. I began to meditate, not in the traditional sense, but through deliberate focus on mental clarity. I practiced compartmentalizing fear, separating emotion from strategy. I learned to observe my own responses without judgment, to recognize when panic was creeping in, and to redirect it into calculated energy. The more I practiced, the sharper my focus became, the quieter the chaos inside. Eva and I developed a code of communication, subtle gestures and phrases that allowed us to convey information without alerting potential observers. Trust became both a weapon and a shield. Every interaction, every plan, every decision was now filtered through a lens of awareness, caution, and shared understanding. I also began studying Harold's past more intensely. Every article, every video clip, every interview revealed patterns of thought, moments of hubris, glimpses of personal weakness. It became clear that Harold was brilliant, yes, but his brilliance was rooted in control, in predictability, in the assumption that others would act out of fear. And fear, I realized, could be neutralized. The inner shift was not instantaneous. It was incremental, subtle, often interrupted by moments of panic and self-doubt. There were nights when I would wake drenched in sweat, the weight of Harold's omnipresence pressing down. But each time I reminded myself, fear is a signal, not a command. The breakdown had shown me the stakes, and the stakes demanded clarity, not chaos. I began to reclaim spaces of autonomy. I altered routines, created decoys, set traps of information to gauge Harold's reactions. Each small victory, each step taken with intent, reinforced the inner shift. My confidence grew not through confrontation, but through preparation, observation, and understanding. Eva became a partner in this awakening. She observed, asked questions, and offered insights that I might have missed. Her perspective reminded me that this was not only about survival, but about shaping the narrative, reclaiming agency from someone who had tried to dominate every aspect of our lives. And slowly I began to experience a sense of empowerment I had not felt in months. The breakdown had been excruciating, yes, but it had also stripped away illusion, distraction, and complacency. I saw Harold not as an omnipotent force, but as a man bound by his methods, his patterns, his expectations. The inner shift was complete when I realized Harold's power was formidable, but it was not limitless. I no longer reacted out of fear. I planned, I observed, I anticipated. I reclaimed the narrative of my own life and Eva's, piece by piece, detail by detail. The shift was psychological, but its impact was tangible. Sleepless nights became periods of focused research, despair became calculation, paralysis became action. The final piece of the inner shift was acceptance. I accepted that Harold would continue to manipulate, to challenge, to provoke, but I no longer needed to be controlled by his actions. Control had shifted inward. Fear remained, but it was now a tool, a gauge, a reminder of what was at stake rather than a chain that bound me. I looked at Eva one night, the city skyline flickering in the distance, and saw not only fear but potential, resilience, and hope. The inner shift was not just mine, it was ours. Together we were no longer merely reacting, we were preparing, anticipating, and most importantly, reclaiming agency. The breakdown had been the crucible. The inner shift was the awakening, and in that awakening lay the next step, the confrontation, the reckoning, and the opportunity to turn knowledge into strategy, fear into focus, and despair into action. Harold had shown me the worst of what he could do, but the inner shift had revealed the best of what I could endure. And for the first time in months, I felt not like a pawn, but a player. The city slept, oblivious, while above it, the quiet storm of preparation and awareness began to take shape. The inner shift had occurred, and with it, a clarity that fear alone could never provide. The battle was not only external, it was internal, and winning that internal war was the key to surviving, confronting, and ultimately outmaneuvering Harold. The inner shift had given me clarity, but clarity alone would not be enough. Knowledge and resilience are potent tools, but without action they are nothing more than dormant power. It was time to transform insight into strategy, fear into calculation, and despair into deliberate motion. Reversal wasn't merely about retaliation, it was about reclaiming agency, restoring justice, and ensuring Harold could never manipulate us again. The first step was reconnaissance. Harold had always operated in shadows, leveraging fear, misdirection, and meticulous planning to stay one step ahead. If I was going to counter him, I had to illuminate every hidden corner of his world. I began by tracing digital footprints, analyzing financial records, cross-referencing social media, and reconstructing timelines of his previous actions. Every fragment of information, every slip in his otherwise flawless facade, became a weapon in preparation. Eva became more than a partner, she became a strategist, a co-architect of our plan. She scrutinized details I might overlook, questioned assumptions I might accept blindly, and offered perspectives grounded in intuition that data alone could not provide. Our collaboration was no longer reactive, it was proactive. Together, we developed a multi-layered approach that combined patience, cunning, and precision. He understood one fundamental truth: Harold thrived on psychological dominance. The moment we displayed fear or uncertainty, we handed him power. Therefore, our reversal had to start with the mind, the framing of the narrative, the projection of control, the subtle signals that we were no longer prey but calculated predators. Step 2 involved creating controlled exposure. We allowed Harold to perceive activity where none existed, to believe he was guiding events when, in reality, we were guiding him. We planted false trails, seeded misinformation, and monitored his reactions. Every response, every instinctive move he made revealed patterns, weaknesses, and openings we could exploit. The third step was assembling allies. Isolation had been Harold's greatest advantage. By keeping us alone, he ensured every decision, every emotional response, every hesitation could be manipulated. But networks of support, trusted colleagues, law enforcement contacts, and even sympathetic insiders became tools to amplify our influence. Each ally contributed intelligence, perspective, and leverage that made Harold's control increasingly fragile. We also turned our attention to contingency. Harold had always assumed unpredictability on our part. Now we assumed unpredictability on his. Every move was accompanied by backups, fail-safes, and pre-planned adjustments. We prepared for exposure, miscalculation, or betrayal. No scenario, no matter how extreme, would catch us unprepared. This level of preparation was exhausting, but it forged a sense of invincibility, at least within the confines of strategy and execution. The psychological component of reversal required careful orchestration. We could not act out of rage alone. Revenge driven by emotion would play into Harold's hands. Instead, our actions were calculated, deliberate, and symbolic. Each step had meaning, a demonstration of awareness, a signal of resistance, a claim to power Harold thought he had stolen. Our first tangible move came in the form of exposure. Using digital traces, we highlighted instances of Harold's manipulation, corruption, and deceit without revealing our full hand. The exposure was subtle but undeniable, planted in channels where Harold could see the ripple of consequences forming. The effect was immediate: minor disruptions, erratic behavior, and most importantly, the first cracks in his previously unshakable confidence. We escalated methodically. Each maneuver was small enough to avoid overcommitment, but precise enough to force Harold into reaction. A miscalculated message, a leaked connection, a strategically timed public statement, each action pulled him closer to vulnerability. The process was iterative: observe, anticipate, test, and exploit. Every victory, however minor, built momentum, reinforcing our confidence and eroding his. Eva's role became increasingly critical in these stages. Her observations, her intuition, her subtle influence on our communication lines allowed us to anticipate Harold's reactions in ways data alone could not predict. She became both a sounding board and a sensor, attuned to nuances I might overlook. Our partnership transcended strategy; it became a synchronization of thought and purpose. We also began reclaiming the narrative in public perception. Harold had relied on misinformation and fear to control not only us but others. By countering with clarity, truth, and timing, we reshaped the environment in which he operated. Friends, colleagues, and observers began questioning his motives, challenging his authority, and slowly withdrawing the implicit support he had assumed would remain unbroken. The reversal, however, was not without danger. Harold sensed the shift, reacted with aggression, and escalated pressure to regain dominance. Threats became more frequent, manipulations more intense, and provocations more personal. But by this point, we were no longer reactive. Each threat was analyzed. Each provocation anticipated, each move countered with precision. Fear, once his weapon, had become our gauge, informing strategy rather than dictating it. Financial leverage became another tool. Harold's operations depended on resources meticulously maintained and controlled. By tracing, redirecting, and subtly influencing these channels, we created pressure points, forcing errors, and exposing vulnerabilities. Each misstep further weakened his hold and increased the psychological weight he bore. The culmination of the reversal required direct confrontation, but not in the form of a head-on clash. Harold's greatest strength had always been control through intimidation. To defeat him, we needed to engineer a scenario where his control would unravel on its own. We orchestrated situations that forced him to confront his own contradictions. Over-reliance on predictability and his underestimation of our capabilities. The psychological payoff was immediate. Harold's carefully constructed world began to collapse not through brute force but through exposure, insight, and strategy. Friends and allies began questioning their loyalty. Partners and intermediaries hesitated. Every manipulated reaction worked against him, turning his own tactics into liabilities. The reversal was as much internal as external. Dismantling the fear-driven hierarchy he had built, our ultimate act of payback was symbolic yet precise. We revealed the totality of our preparation, exposing the seams in Harold's network while maintaining discretion to protect ourselves and allies. It was a calculated display of control, demonstrating that we had not only survived but anticipated, countered, and learned from every step of his manipulation. The shock to Harold was profound. He realized that the predator had become the prey, that every move he had counted on was now anticipated, neutralized, or reversed. Justice in this sense was not about revenge in the classical sense. It was about restoration, reclamation, and balance. Harold's power was dismantled piece by piece, his influence neutralized, and his ability to harm us and others significantly diminished. The reversal achieved its purpose, reclaiming autonomy, restoring dignity, and demonstrating that control once lost could be regained through insight, preparation, and calculated action. And yet, the process was humbling. We understood that no reversal could erase past pain, that no plan could guarantee absolute safety, and that vigilance would always be necessary. The act of reclaiming agency came with responsibility, to ourselves, to each other, and to anyone caught in the crossfire of manipulation. As we stood together, surveying the aftermath of our meticulous strategy, the sense of empowerment was tempered by reflection. Reversal had succeeded not through impulse or aggression, but through understanding, calculation, and patience. We had reclaimed control not by becoming monsters ourselves, but by outthinking, outmaneuvering, and ultimately outlasting the one who sought to dominate us. The city outside remained unaware of the subtle war waged in the shadows. For Harold, the world was no longer predictable. For Eva and me, the world had regained order in its chaos, and with that order came the possibility of moving forward, of healing. and of redefining our lives on our own terms. The lesson was clear. The cycle of manipulation, fear, and control could be broken. Strategy, resilience, and unity were powerful weapons. The reversal had been complete, not as an act of vengeance, but as a reclamation of justice, an assertion of autonomy, and a demonstration that even in the darkest moments, calculated, patient, and intelligent action could transform despair into empowerment. And as the first hints of dawn touched the skyline, I understood that this was not the end of the journey, it was the threshold. Harold had been neutralized, yes, but the world remained unpredictable. The reversal had proven that fear could be harnessed, control could be reclaimed, and justice could be achieved through careful, deliberate action. The path forward would demand the same vigilance, the same insight, the same resolve, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The path was ours to choose. The storm had passed. The whirlwind of fear, manipulation, and relentless pressure that had dominated our lives was finally quiet. In its aftermath, a stillness settled over the city and over us, a silence that was neither empty nor lifeless but contemplative. It was a silence that demanded recognition, reflection, and the acknowledgement of change. Eva and I walked through streets that seemed familiar yet subtly transformed, as if the city itself had absorbed some of the tension, some of the lingering anxiety, and now carried the quiet aftermath in its pulse. The ordinary noises, the hum of traffic, the distant chatter of neighbors, the rustle of leaves in the wind took on a new weight, a new clarity. These mundane sounds, once overlooked, now represented normalcy, freedom, and the life we had fought to reclaim. We took time to reflect on what had transpired. The reversal against Harold had not been simple, nor had it been painless. Every calculated move, every subtle manipulation of events had demanded focus, patience, and moral precision. There were moments when anger threatened to override strategy, when fear whispered of retreat, and when doubt questioned whether justice was attainable. Yet through each trial we had emerged not only intact but strengthened, transformed by the very chaos that had once sought to consume us. It became clear that the victory was more than circumstantial. Harold's power had been dismantled, yes, but the true change was internal. We had learned to see clearly, to anticipate, and to act deliberately. We had cultivated resilience not as a shield but as a compass, guiding our decisions, shaping our perceptions, and helping us navigate the unpredictable landscape of human behavior. The triumph was subtle, quiet, but profound. The reclamation of agency, the restoration of self-determination, and the realization that fear, once mastered, no longer dictated our choices. In the quiet, I considered the cost. Relationships had been tested, trust strained, and alliances challenged. Yet those who remained by our side, who had weathered the storm with us, emerged stronger and more united. There was a sense of gratitude, not the naive, fleeting gratitude of relief, but a deeper recognition of solidarity, loyalty, and shared perseverance. Every ally, every voice of support, had been a thread woven into the fabric of our eventual success. I also reflected on the lessons Harold had inadvertently taught us. His methods, ruthless and calculating, exposed vulnerabilities we had never considered. His underestimation of our resolve became a mirror, showing us what we were capable of when pushed to the edge. In this sense, Harold had been a teacher, albeit a cruel one, forcing us to confront limitations, challenge assumptions, and ultimately expand the boundaries of courage, strategy, and insight. The emotional residue of the confrontation lingered. Despite our intellectual understanding of strategy and outcome, remnants of fear, anger, and sorrow remained. It was natural proof that the ordeal had been real, that the stakes had been high, and that the human heart cannot simply be reset like a machine. Yet even this emotional echo was instructive, reminding us of our capacity to feel deeply, to endure, and to heal gradually. As we rebuilt routines and returned to daily life, subtle changes became apparent. Small victories in personal agency, asserting boundaries, making deliberate choices, engaging with the world on our terms, served as reminders that the reversal had created more than an external outcome. It had seeded internal growth. We had learned that empowerment is not merely the absence of control by others, but the conscious exercise of self-determination in every aspect of life. Looking forward, we recognized the responsibility that accompanied such reclamation. The lessons of fear, manipulation, and resilience were not ours to hoard. They were experiences meant to be integrated into our worldview, shaping the way we approached challenges, evaluated relationships, and interpreted the intentions of those around us. In essence, the aftermath was not just a moment of quiet reflection, but a threshold to deliberate living, an opportunity to navigate future complexities with wisdom and foresight. There was also a desire to memorialize the experience, not in a way that glorified pain or revenge, but in a way that honored growth, insight, and endurance. Journals were written, conversations were shared, and the narrative was preserved, not for public display, but for personal accountability and continued guidance. The act of documentation became a ritual, a method of translating chaos into comprehension and fear into structured understanding. Silence, in this final phase, became more than the absence of conflict. It became a space for contemplation, for acknowledging the delicate balance between justice and morality, between action and restraint, between courage and recklessness. We learned that the quiet following turmoil is not emptiness, it is a canvas, offering clarity, perspective, and the opportunity to choose what to build next. In that silence, I also observed the world with renewed attentiveness. Faces in the crowd, interactions in the workplace. The rhythm of everyday life, all were imbued with subtle significance. Every choice, every gesture, every word could carry weight, and we were now attuned to the consequences of observation, the power of discernment, and the necessity of mindful engagement. It was a world that had always existed, yet only now did we navigate it with conscious intent. Ultimately, the final reflection was a reconciliation with both the past and the future. We did not erase pain. Nor did we glorify struggle. We acknowledged each challenge, each setback, and each act of manipulation as part of a continuum that shaped who we had become. In this acknowledgement, we found closure, not complete perhaps, but sufficient to move forward with integrity, purpose, and cautious optimism. As the days unfolded, the lessons endured. We recognized the importance of boundaries, of vigilance, and of discernment. We cherished the moments of calm, understanding that they were fragile, and we approached each decision with the deliberate awareness that comes from surviving chaos. The city, the people, the ordinary moments, all were now perceived through a lens of clarity, tempered by experience, and enriched by the capacity to act without fear. In the end, the story of the confrontation, the reversal, and the aftermath became more than a narrative of victory over a manipulative force. It became a testament to resilience, strategic insight, moral clarity, and the enduring power of reflection. The silence that followed was not the end, it was a foundation, a quiet space upon which to build understanding, wisdom, and the life we now knew we were capable of living. And in that silence, with the city breathing gently around us, Eva and I shared a look that required no words. The ordeal had ended, but its imprint would remain. It had shaped us, strengthened us, and reminded us of the subtle power of deliberate action. The past was acknowledged, the present claimed, and the future awaited, not as a threat, but as a field of possibility, open to choice, insight, and conscious creation. The final reflection was clear. Survival is not merely existence. Survival is awareness, empowerment, and the courage to act with integrity. Justice is not merely revenge. Justice is balance, understanding, and reclamation of agency. And silence is not emptiness. It is presence, reflection, and the calm before the next chapter of life begins.